The raiders of the world. The uncivilized animal horde in human skin. The savage barbarians of the north. The Vikings. Uncivilized barbarians. Illiterate savages. For hundreds of years, that is what we thought Vikings were like. But were they really? Popular culture has spun many myths about Vikings, but what is myth and what is actually true? Myth number 1. Vikings used horns on their helmets. Perhaps the most common Viking myth is regarding the supposed horns on their helmets. But there is actually very little archaeological evidence to support this claim. The most common Viking helmet would probably be a simple but perfectly normal iron cap with a brow ridge to protect the eyes and nose, sometimes with chainmail, more often without. A simple iron helmet like any other warrior at the time. But no horns on top of them. Horned helmets may have been used for religious ceremonies and such, but in battle they would just get in the way, so they weren't used. Myth number 2. The axe was their main weapon. Picture a Viking. You might imagine a big chunky man with a big chunky axe. But you have to ask yourself, what actually is a Viking? A Viking is just a common farmer or fisherman who, when summer comes, might go out and raid parts of the world, often with a local earl. Harald, verføren til Parisar. Jeg skal være Tharabarat. And since most of these farmers were quite poor, they just kind of went with the weapons they had. And the cheapest of these, simple, a stick with a pointy head, a spear. Grab a stick, grab a piece of metal, put the piece of metal on top of the stick, and you're good to go and raid England or the Baltics or wherever. Now, some rich or elite warrior Vikings could have used big two-handed axes, known as a Dane-axe. And sometimes they might also have used swords, although these were very, very expensive and rare, and often passed through multiple generations. But most warriors turned out just fine with a pointy stick. Myth number 3. The Vikings were insanely violent. Vikings were bloodthirsty savages who killed everyone they could in the most brutal manner by and then to see them. Or so the myth goes. In reality, Vikings just weren't as violent as many of us think. But yes, they raided and plundered villages, and yes, they fought and killed people. And yes, some parts of their religious practices were quite disturbing, at best. So yes, Vikings absolutely were brutal. But as one professor put it, were they doing anything out of the norm? And the answer is, maybe not. Because, after all, it's the Middle Ages and everyone is kind of brutal. So it's absolutely correct to call the Vikings brutal, but to make them into animalistic savages who do nothing but kill people is an exaggeration and not true to history. Conclusion. Where did these myths even come from? Well, the myth that Vikings had horned helmets likely came from an opera during the 1800s, where the composer loosely depicted Vikings based on tales and folk saga. Sehe ich wie eine Viking aus? Ja, laut dieser Saga. And not direct historical evidence. And the myth that Vikings used these big axes only and were incredibly brutal most probably came from the writings of English monks, since basically the first things Vikings did in England was to raid a holy monastery in Lindisfarne. So these Christian monks possibly thought that the Vikings had been sent by God himself to punish them for their sins. Is good as benimmet, it's not, brother Cuthbert. Aktaisa haufen an sindon met svelke daivlo. Exacterategia, munkur. As Alcuin of York wrote, is this the outcome of the sins of those who inhabit the land? And that written narrative of Vikings being devilishly savage kind of stuck with us, even until today. Which should serve as a reminder that the power of history lies with those who write it.